So, hello, and welcome to today's event, Disability Through a Literary Lens, hosted by the Writer Center, a literary arts nonprofit supporting writers and everybody who wants to write. As a nonprofit, we rely on the support of writers like you. Even $10 can be a huge help, so please consider donating using the QR code at the back of the room so we can support you in return with hundreds of creative writing workshops and free events like this one. In the coming weeks, we'll be hosting an open mic at the Writer Center, which is a free event. It'll be on Wednesday, October 8th. And we're also hosting Search Party, Find Your Writing Group, which will be on October 12th, as a Sunday, also a free event. Many more amazing creative writing workshops and dozens of free events are listed in our magazine, which is free to take, and those same offerings can be found on our website, which is writer.org. To this end, a few housekeeping notes. Restrooms can be found in the lobby and downstairs as well. If you're looking for a low-cost place to write or meet with a writing group, feel free to chat with our desk assistant about becoming a member of the Writer Center. And last but not least, we are a community. The Writer Center is committed to actively embracing a welcoming environment for everyone. Everyone means writers of all races, ages, religions, genders, sexual orientations, disabilities, and other human differences. We expect participants, facilitators, staff, and volunteers to treat each other with respect in all interactions and to conduct themselves in manners conducive to learning and creativity. So without further ado, let's begin the panel. So I should introduce myself first. My name is Claude. I'm the operations manager here at the Writer Center. I've worked here for about 3 years. I'm also a writer. And I'm happy to be hosting this event. So I think we can start by introducing the rest of the folks here. So we're just going to go down the line. If you share just your name, pronouns, and a bit about you. We like to ask the Writer Center, who the heck are you? So, so I can start right here to my right, if you want to get started.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ava Serra. My pronouns are they, she. And I write primarily poetry. My current project is about disordered menstruation, so specifically through the lens of premenstrual dysphoria disorder. If you haven't heard of that, it's basically PMS on steroids and angrier. And writing about that in a Baroque way that those who attended my workshop will be familiar with.
I'm Rhonda Zimlich, and my pronouns are she, her, and I would 100% read that. Thank you for writing it. My current project is a memoir about having multiple sclerosis and running long distances. And I can't think of anything else to say. The end.
My name is Casey Catherine Moore. I write predominantly poetry that is mythological. I have a classics background, and I write on bipolar disorder. My current project is on the fall of Rome and current events, is what I've been writing on lately. And I also am going to mention quickly that I host a queer and neurodivergent open mic at As You Are on first Thursdays every month. So if you want to check that out, please come see me.
Hi, my name is Natalie Illum. I am a poet. I come from a spoken word and activist background. My current project is surviving this administration. I'm also a federal employee who has somehow been riffed 4 times and am currently furloughed. But I think in terms of writing, for the last year I've been teaching a lot, but also writing about sharks and grief. Every time I sit down and I say I'm not going to write a poem about grief, there winds up being a poem about grief, because I think we're all grieving in different ways. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you all. I've got a couple questions for you, hoping to spark some conversation. And then at the end, we will take questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions that come in mind, just note them down in some way, and then we'll have a chance to share. And I should also say that after the panel, there will be a reception, so we'll have just some food, some drinks. It'll be a good time. So my first question is, how does disability show up in your work? So if you write about it directly, or if it kind of comes up indirectly. For instance, one of my published pieces is about my living with dwarfism, but it's more about my relationship with sexuality. So it's like it's kind of it's a combination of those things. So yeah, anyone who's willing to jump in? Or we can go down the line. No, go ahead.
Okay. I am neurodivergent, bipolar, my primary thing. So it shows up a lot in my work through nature imagery a lot. That's how I process a lot of what happens in my brain. It's not the only thing I write about, but it shows up as a way for me to process how I experience the world, I would say. And disability, generally, writing helps with that.
I stay pretty close to what I know and what my autobiographical experience is. So I would say almost every poem that I write is a disability lens poem. It's really hard for me to break that. I challenge myself to do that because I'm like, can you research anything that isn't your own memory? Apparently not. And I started sort of from childhood and sort of went in chronological order. So my earlier work is basically about like domestic violence and child abuse, which can happen a lot in the disability community, and now sort of dealing with perimenopause and, you know, being disabled and sharks. So, yeah.
I'll jump in here to say that I think the struggle to break out of writing about disability makes a lot of sense because we talked about this in my workshop, but your disability is pervasive through your everyday life, and our everyday life can't help but influence our writing, and it influences our own individual microcosms. So I think it makes a lot of sense that that comes up in your writing, in our writing. And I think that's also something that is, at least in my experience, somewhat stigmatized. I feel like there's sometimes people who discourage writing about the disabled experience because it's non-normative, and the Anglophone canon has made a conscious effort to exclude those experiences.
Yeah, so I guess we talked about like how disability shows up, but also how does it influence your writing process? Whether, for me, because I'm someone who deals with physical disability as well as mental illness, and so, you know, my physical disability does not really influence my writing process, but mentally it creates some challenges, but also it generates some new ideas and some creativity. So I'm kind of curious if there are ways in which in which your disability you feel like shapes your process, and if you weren't disabled, you'd have a different process.
I can definitely respond to this because with multiple sclerosis, fatigue is definitely a part of having MS, and if I am tired or under stress, I cannot write. And with my job, often I am tired and under stress, and it does impact my ability to write. But I also will sometimes find myself doing things where I am saving a document multiple times in different iterations of it, and when I go back to the same file, I see, wait a second, I've saved this 2 or 3 different times, and so I have cognitive impairment as well, and I have to remember that, you know, because of the position of the lesions in my brain, I have to be intentionally conscious of where I've saved things and how I've saved them, you know, and double and sometimes triple checking my work, right?
I can just say, just aging-wise, that over time, I would, like, if I had a poem in my head, like, I would get up out of bed and sit at that laptop and finish the draft and the revision, and I would just sort of keep going until it was done. And now, if I have an idea, I'm lucky if I capture it in my phone, like before I fall asleep. Like, I'm not getting up in the middle of the night to write a poem. Like, it just doesn't seem like that dire anymore, right? But like, you know, when I was coming up in the spoken word community and you had to like, you know, write down all of your like ideas in case they became something, and then, you know, like send them to your friends first thing in the morning and be like, is this good? Like, you know, like that doesn't happen 20 years later for me. In terms of my process, I'm like, stay down, and, you know, you just deal with it like the next day.
I think I relate to that a little bit too. And also just as a moody person, I feel like I'm never the same and my creativity is never the same. So sometimes I can write a lot, sometimes it's a little, sometimes it's this imagery, sometimes it's not. So I think as I've gotten older, just kind of accepting like, you can produce something this month, you can't this month, you can do 5 poems today. So I think kind of just taking what I can do as what it is how it has worked for me. And I used to try and force it, and you don't get good poems that way.
Yeah.
That acceptance of what you can or cannot produce in a month or a week is so real. And there's a lot of, in my experience, a lot of grief and time involved in that. For me in my writing process, for the longest time, I didn't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to figure out why my first drafts weren't like the first drafts of so many of my peers. And I felt like a lesser writer for that. My first drafts, I've learned, need to be very forthright, very uncensored, and they're not going to be very eloquent, poetic, etc. But how I used to feel, I used to look at the first drafts of my peers and see all of this sophistication right off the bat and all of these beautiful metaphors and threads already tying in. And I've, again, felt lesser because I was like, my brain just doesn't work like that. And once I got the vocabulary and learned that my brain is, you know, proverbially wired differently than neurotypical brains, that gave me so much self-acceptance.
No, totally. I totally get that. Just like, yeah, so as my brain, it just runs its own show, and I don't know what's going on. So I guess, kind of going off what we were talking about, like, are there certain like metaphors or imagery you're drawn to when writing about disability? For instance, for me, I'm always really interested in the idea of like holiness and spirituality, and sort of how disability like has been framed throughout history as in some ways making you more holy, in some ways making you less of like a sacred object or whatever you want to say. And yeah, I'm also interested in like insects, weirdly, and like the animal world, the natural world. I have a lot of that on my body. So I guess I'm curious if there's certain images that stand out to you that you've gone back to in the past that you want to go towards in the future.
I will say this is, this conceit, this metaphor is difficult to navigate. There's a lot of risk with it, but the past couple years I've been very interested in imagining these exchanges between an anthropomorphic extraterrestrial and NASA, and I look at voice-to-ground transcriptions from the Apollo missions to get a sense of tone, and just fathom these really bizarre conversations between this extraterrestrial and mission control center. And it comes with a lot of risks because there's a risk of sensationalizing disability, a risk of further othering folks who are marginalized. So the way that I try to navigate the risks there, the extraterrestrial always has autonomy. When the extraterrestrial feels threatened or they want the poem to end, the poem ends. When Mission Control Center pressures for details about the extraterrestrial's physical appearance, the extraterrestrial will reflect those questions back to Mission Control Center to highlight how invasive that can be. So that's been my recent fascination the past couple of years.
Yeah, we were sort of just talking about this in my workshop, and it was Gabriella, I don't know if she's still here, she was talking about rainfall, standing in rainfall was a metaphor that she had picked, and that the conversation sort of evolved to this idea of water and being in water, and I was thinking about how diverse this idea of water as a metaphor could be, And really you can give water as a metaphor to a group of people, and it's going to mean something different to everybody, right? You can give this idea of disability to a group of people, and it's going to mean something different to all of us because we all have our own unique experience with it, right? And so if I say water, here's the metaphor, what do you bring to that? You know, it's buoyant, or maybe we go along with the tide of it, or maybe, you know, that sensation of being wet doesn't appeal to you, or to somebody else it really does. You do like to be wet, you know, so the way that you interpret it is going to be different, but what you write into it, that's the thing that's going to come out to your reader, you know, and I think you were saying a little bit of that with the space metaphor, right? And that there certainly is risk, you know, you want to make sure that when you're using a metaphor that you're being very cautious with that.
For me, it's trees all the time, all kinds of trees in all seasons, roots of trees, branches of trees, broken trees. I really see bipolar disorder as a tree that's on fire on top and then flooded in the roots and then sturdy in the middle. So there's a lot of that happening. There are a lot of trees in my workshop, which wasn't about bipolar disorder, but I like trees. They come up a lot.
Yeah, I like sharks. I like my central project, I guess, I've been working on this for way too long, is called My Fear of Sharks is Just a Metaphor, and in each poem, the shark changes, disability changes to like a different ism, changes to a different oppression, so that comes up a lot. I think I started my work like relying very heavily on physical parts of the body and either the sexualization or desexualization of those parts of the body as it relates to my conditions, and as a way of proving or telling or showing something. I no longer do that. That's gone. But I definitely started there as like a sort of like shock and awe, show and tell thing, which I think I'm not going to say a lot, but people with disabilities, whether they're performers or writers or not, experience as a way of navigating ableism. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, so I guess going into sort of the broader realm of like pop culture, are there any examples that inspire you when writing disability, or conversely, any examples what you try to avoid? So for my example, I really love the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It's one of my favorite TV shows. And it is about like mental illness and the attachment between people, and I think it's done in this really smart, really interesting way. But conversely, there's a lot of weird reality shows about people with disabilities that, I try to steer away from. So yeah, what sort of examples do you feel like you've seen out in the world, whether it be music or TV shows or movies or books, that you feel like have gained popularity, that inspire you, or that really detract you?
This is a hard one. Like we could do so much better at representing all types of disabilities in the larger world, right? Like whatever Hollywood thinks they're doing that is enough, they could ramp that up 1,000%, and it probably still wouldn't be enough. I think a lot of the, oh God, it's a double-edged sword. I don't take inspiration from like pop culture. I could go somewhere. I mean, Lady Gaga's cool. I give her my money. You know, like I give other people. But then conversely, you know, like I don't give Selma Blair my money. You know, like there's like a weird fixation on those things, I think.
I agree with that, and I like when I don't know. I don't like when it's sensationalized. I like when characters are in mainstream media that aren't like propped up to be like, hey, look, we put a person with disabilities, and like this is an inspirational person. gross. But Only Murders in the Building has this character that uses ASL, and it's great, you know, it's like this is just a person who's a character in this story and uses ASL, and it's not like, you know, oh hey, it's not a big deal. Breaking Bad, the son is a person with disability. They don't really make an issue out of it. One of the things that I thought was a missed opportunity was during Dead to Me, Christina Applegate was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during season 2, and instead of letting the show incorporate that in, they hid it. So you'll see her like leaned up against the set, like instead of like, you know, maybe letting the character have MS, you know, they like had to like prop her into a banister, you know, and they hid the fact that the actor herself has this chronic illness, and I thought it was a bad choice, and a lot of fans thought it was a bad choice. They should have just let people know that she got sick during the making of that series.
I think it's interesting that you bring up both sensationalizing things and hiding them, right? Because that's something that happens a lot. I get really frustrated with depictions of people with mental health diagnoses because they only show us if we're like losing it, right? Because that's what's interesting. You know, like Bradley Cooper does a really great job in Silver Linings Playbook. He's a pretty accurate bipolar person, but he's a disaster. You know, there's no like thriving people with this in media. So I don't know that there's any that I take inspiration from. I use pop culture in my work, but not because they're doing a great job out there with us.
Similarly, what comes to mind for me, based on what you just said, my partner is rewatching Grey's Anatomy, and I have to admit, the portrayal of PTSD in Grey's Anatomy infuriates me. As you were just saying, it's focused on in the short term when it causes a character a lot of strife and when it's a good dramatic plot point, but the long-term portrayal of how PTSD specifically impacts your everyday life and is so hyper-present frustrates me to the point where I can't watch the show.
So I guess overall, we could be doing a better job. So I guess, you know, in the face of that, in the face of not having a lot of mainstream representation, how do we find community in the writing world, local or beyond? Especially related to disability and physical disability. And if you've been able to find that, how is it manifested? So for me, I'm working on, you know, doing events like this, using my position at the Writer Center to be able to create community. I do want to plug very quickly, which I should have at the beginning. I host a Disabled Writers Mixer quarterly. It happens here at the Writer Center. It's very chill hangout. We have food, we have snacks, and drinks, and we just chat and kind of bond, talk about disability, talk about writing. We just kind of hang out. So if anyone who are interested in that, come see me after. So yeah, how do we find community as disabled writers? How have you gone about that?
I started from like a performance spoken word background in the late 90s, and for a long time it was like a solo journey. Like there was not a lot of representation out there, and then after me, more people started doing performance, specifically spoken word and slam, that identified as having a disability, or let me be clear, a physical disability, again, staying in my lane, not neurodivergent or invisible disabilities or other disabilities, specifically physical disabilities. And now there is a whole community of spoken word and slam people who identify as physically disabled, and I think it takes a couple of people to start it, and I'm not saying I was the first, but I'm saying it takes a couple of people to be visible, and then more people come out of the woodwork. I think now, with what we have and are going through with the COVID pandemic, the presence of virtual events and virtual community is so much more present, because all of a sudden able-bodied people were afraid that they would get sick. So then we built virtual platforms that we could have had all along for disabled people to build community, but it didn't seem relevant when it didn't apply to the majority, right? But now that we have those tools, we are able to form community virtually. And I think that's really important for people with disabilities and illnesses to be able to connect to one another.
I connect with that as well. As somebody who hosts frequently, I think also being visible, right, is a thing, because then people come up to you and they're like, me too.
Right.
So I made a lot of friends that way, and doing events online, and also like, you know, spaces where it's care for people, right? So like if you're in a support group, or if you're in other things related to whatever you have going on, that's another way that I've made community. And then for writing specifically, I just always write. I make all my friends write with me. So even if they're not writers, that's what they're doing. So just create your own, you guys.
I totally want in on the mixer.
You should come.
I will. Thank you. I'm in. And I belong to an academic community, and we have a group on our campus that's sort of an unofficial club for faculty, staff, and administrators, and we get together every other month on a little Zoom group, and we talk about things like how important it is to put furniture back in the place that you found it in classrooms. We have 2 blind faculty that when they have to come back into a room and they have to navigate the space, it's really important to have furniture back where it's supposed to be. And it's just not something that everybody thinks about, you know, but that's a really important thing. So we talk about stuff like that at the meetings, and then we all get to go out into the community and share that with people that also wouldn't normally think about that sort of thing. And we get to write together, and we get to create together, and it's lovely, and I just love that.
This is a bit of a tangent for the question, but just talking about universal design and accommodations in physical spaces, something that is always on the forefront of my mind is how universal design and these accommodations so often not only make accessible certain spaces, events to disabled communities, but also they often benefit everyone as well. And it's frustrating to have to communicate that so ardently and advocate for that so ardently when you know that it would benefit everyone. Back to the question on community, I have thinking about community in a less conventional sense, in a atemporal sense, referring to living and also past writers with similar disabilities, similar experiences is a refuge for me as well. So even if the writer is no longer with us, writing in a sort of conversation with those writers, seeing our writings in conversation is very comforting, very profound, very generative for me.
Yeah, totally. And I think I'm going to ask a question I didn't send you in advance, so get ready. This brought to mind sort of what still writers do you look to? Like, if there are ones that you are able to look to, since it's still very much a growing community of like being able to become more present, as we talked about in our pop culture question. So for me, I'm currently working on a project where I'm going through the work of women with mental illness, writing about mental illness. So, you know, some of the famous ones, Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, all of those types, but also ones that are less well known, Shulamith Firestone, Janet Frame, folks like that. So I guess, are there writers that, you know, inspire you in the way they were about maybe your own disability or other ones that you look to?
For me, Sam Sachs, the poet, was so pivotal in just getting internal conversations started within myself about disability. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I realize that I actually don't know if Sam identifies as disabled, but their collection, Madness, left a great impression on me. It's something I refer to often and helped shape and improve my writing.
For intergenerational trauma, I have read everything Dorothy Allison has ever written. Love it. And also Anne Sexton is probably on your list. I love Anne Sexton. I read Anne Sexton when I have writer's block too.
I visited her grave last week. I was in a
Anne
cemetery.
Sexton is how I realized I had a mental illness. It's like reading her, I was like, oh.
Yeah, probably same, actually, now that you say that. And I'm also going to say Scott Jurek, although I don't know if anybody in this room would know him, but he is a long distance runner. He had the record for the Appalachian Trail, sorry, I'm from the West Coast. But his mother had multiple sclerosis, and so he writes a lot about caretaking and also running long distances. So he was one of the few people that was writing about MS back when I first was diagnosed.
It's a hard one for me because we recently lost Andrea Gibson, who was a very close friend of mine, but also really pivotal in my spoken word career and back when we were touring together. But I was reflecting earlier that most of my poetry mentors have now passed. So Claudia Emerson of cancer, Richard McCann of complications from a liver transplant, Myra Skleroux, now Andrea. So I definitely have poetry elders still, but the people that were the most pivotal in showing me, telling me, allowing me to be a poet and a performer are gone, which is weird because I'm only 49 and Andrea was only 49 and Claudia was only 58, and it feels like unmooring to be like at the end of that chain.
I think my most influential poet is a really ancient one, Catullus. You guys know Catullus? He's like nerdy, sexy, angry, volatile, has every kind of poem in there. And we don't know if he had any kind of disability, but I mean, if you read him, you're kind of like, so him, I love Emily Dickinson. She's got bars. And I also really love this collection by Shira Ehrlichman, Odes to Lithium. Yes, I reread that a lot. If I'm stuck, I love the side effect of when I was just looking at that. So yeah, I guess those are probably the big ones.
Awesome. I'm going to check some of these out. I'm going to look back at the recording and be like, what were recommended? I got to check these out. So I guess my final question before we turn it over to the audience is, what messages would you like to share with disabled writers who might just be starting out and either just starting out with writing or just starting out with finding community? I guess, I'm kind of just starting out in my own way, so I'm going to listen to this advice just as much as anybody. So.
Something that I say to all students, I've been teaching for a really long time, is if it doesn't work, change it. So if the prompt doesn't work, change it. The first, whatever isn't working for you, you're not stuck in it. I think a lot of times when we sit down and we have an idea and we start going, sometimes we'll keep going in a direction because we think we have to, but we have freedom of choice. And we know that. But I think knowing that we can adapt things to who we are and what we want to do is important.
This is a hard one for me too. I would say if you're starting out from the perspective of wanting community and building community and not necessarily doing sort of the solitary, I want a book, I want to publish, I want, the things that other writers that I admire have. Make sure that the community that you're building and spending time with always understands who they might be excluding, because that's the first like access point, whether it's like a physical access point, not being sensitive to various things. And I'm like of the generation, if you don't have it, build it. I don't necessarily recommend that anymore. Having built a couple of things, it's really hard, and it doesn't always work out. And is the juice worth the squeeze? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then I think, and this is just something that I'm learning right now, pivot. I've been working on this shark thing for so long, maybe it's time to pivot. I'm not saying if you're a poet, become an epic historical fiction writer, that doesn't seem right, but be willing to pivot or push yourself in a different direction. Just as an example, I recently took took a workshop on form, and I was really intent the whole week. It was at the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, in breaking the form, breaking every prompt, because I knew I could do the form, but I'm I'm just gonna break this. And then the instructor was why do you keep breaking it? Why don't you just actually do what the poem is designed to do? Because if you did that, let me show you how this would really work. And he was able to manipulate it back into the true form. And I was yeah, why am I over here being I'm gonna break the form because I have to? You don't. Just leave it.
It feels surreal to be answering this question because I still feel like a baby poet, baby writer myself, and so I have to realize that that is perhaps not the case anymore. But for other writers with rejection sensitivity like myself, I wish that someone had told me to insist upon my place, upon a place in the canon. The English canon is built to actively exclude so many people, disabled people, queer people, and it still actively excludes so many of those people. So often the rejections, at least that I will run into, is we loved your work, but it doesn't quite converse with the other pieces because the canon is not rife with experiences like mine. So you have to be stubborn and insistent, and I wish that someone had told me that and made me feel like it was okay to be told, we like your work, but it doesn't converse with others. It doesn't play nicely with the others.
I'm trying to Jeopardy out the question. Can you repeat the question, please?
That's okay. I guess I'm going to refer back to my notes to make sure I get the wording right. But what message would you like to share with disabled writers just starting out? Any writers, but especially disabled writers.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Your answers were all awesome. The most important thing that I do is write. I think it's the most important thing humans can do. I really do. I think it is the most important thing we can do. And I would just say that there's no wrong way to do it. I think that picking up a pen or a keyboard or sitting down to put your thoughts into words is an incredible gift, and we should not take it for granted.
And also, I just want to say this, all of us come from an academic background, right? But don't pressure yourself into thinking that you need an MFA or a higher arts degree to be a real writer. It is rife with all sorts of things that are wonderful and more things that are not. And there are other ways, like the Writer Center, other community groups where you could still get an education and a skill set in the types of writing that you want to do. There are mentorships out there. There are residencies out there. Are they competitive? Some of them are. Are they discriminatory? Some of them are. But please, do not spend $100,000 to call yourself a writer if you don't want or need to. There are other roads. Like it took me, I was telling you, I went to AU. It took me 30 years to pay off that degree. Do I regret it? Absolutely not. Did someone tell me I needed it to be considered a writer? Yes, they did. Were they wrong? Yes, they were. You know, and I'm not disparaging academia. I'm just saying there are like several roads. Like, do not convince yourself that if you don't have a degree in writing that you are not a writer, because that is not true.
Yeah, so I guess on that note, the Writers Center does offer, like I said, hundreds of writing workshops. And we do offer scholarships as well. We offer a general scholarship, we offer a BIPOC scholarship, as well as a scholarship for Salem poets. So check out our website for more information on that. Yeah, so I would like to turn it over to the audience if anyone has any questions. Yeah, feel free to ask at this time. We also will have a reception after where you can talk to the panelists, and we're all people who are just going to be hanging out, and you're welcome to come up to us then as well if that feels better. But yeah, go ahead.
I have a question particularly for Ava about, you were talking about how canon excludes disabled people, queer people, etc. But you also mentioned that closed form poems exclude people with disabilities. I wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about how closed forms exclude people with disabilities, I think about it in a poetic sense, and specifically in terms, a lot of the time, of meter and rhyme. As someone with auditory processing issues, I struggle a lot with these, with rhythm and meter. And I don't have an amazing natural ear. So when people say, write iambs or trochees, I look at a line and I see all the different ways that it can be read. And also there are some people who don't have that internal voice that can demonstrate where the stress should be. And there's also different types of dialects and language, and the stresses go in different places. So a lot of the times I find that rhythm and meter wind up excluding people who have a different auditory experience than the norm, if that answers your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just curious if any of the panelists use meditation in any form to help you in your literary work.
I do. I do sometimes before I start working on writing, for sure. And I sometimes use it in workshops too. Or when I'm doing writing coaching, if they're interested in it. I find it really useful to kind of settle my mind, especially when you work full time and you do other things to kind of shift into that mode. Whenever I go into writing, I try and do something to transition. I make a cup of tea, I light a candle, I breathe for a second. So even if it's not a full-on meditation, it's something to kind of get my brain to shift gears.
Go ahead, sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
All forms. Today we did breathing, and we focused on breathing, and then we actually picked up the pen and wrote through breathing, and we wrote about breathing and captured what breathing was like and what the physical sensation of breathing was like, to go into breathing and breath and body. And then I'll do the other things too, but then I like to experiment, so I'll do a guided meditation, or I'll do a silent meditation, or I've even done like flipping of tarot cards, and like I'll use the 3 cards as a writing prompt, or I'll do like Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, where she talks about tapping into the muse. I'll do that form of like writing prompt. I've done so many different types of meditative prompts just to get myself going.
I don't do any of that, but one of the things that I do that I find useful is like I will set a timer or like put something in my calendar, my phone calendar, that gives me, like, that tells me to do that designated thing. And for me, that's useful. But I also come from a background of looking at song and song structure to like inform my writing. So I guess listening to music is sort of a gateway to my writing, even though I don't, like, I was about to say I don't write songs. That's not true. I have a whole damn album of songs. But no, like I don't write in the song form with a refrain or anything, but I do like to listen to music and then write sometimes.
And I recently got a cat, so that's been causing me to be very meditative, because I want to get up in the morning and I want to journal and I want to write my thoughts down, which is a very meditative experience, because sometimes I get a little too excited about it, and then she sits right down on top of me, and then I'm like, oh, I'm not going to move for half an hour, and that'll be okay. So that's my experience. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I've been writing musicals for a few years, and so my latest project has been a collaboration with a friend of mine who is blind and a drummer, and it's about a blind drummer trying to find his groove, is how I've sort of subtitled it. And it's been a great, really interesting experience trying to collaborate. So one of the issues that's come up in a way is that when I've spoken to him about his experiences, but he's very reserved about certain things, so I've had to reach out and read a lot of blogs and books. I've read a lot of books about people who are blind writing about their lives. And so there's kind of this, on the one hand, people often will talk about that people don't appreciate just how much they can do, how much they, why can't we be treated like normal people? Why do they have to even talk about a disability? We don't want to be treated any differently than a normal person. That's part of it. And then another part of it, which I get a lot from my friend, there's a lot of concern about, oh, well, you know, I get treated this way because I'm blind. I get treated that way because I'm blind. I can't do this because they don't have they don't have the ramp, or they don't have the right kind of software. So in other words, there's kind of this tension, right? And so I just wondered if you've dealt with that. How have you dealt with it? Since I've had some vision issues, which is, I actually wrote another musical about my own vision issues, but this one, it's been challenging for me to kind of, I struggle with that particular issue of like how much of the disability is important. I feel like it's also a personal growth journey for the character. It has to be, because it's a narrative. So anyway, if you just want to comment on that, I appreciate it.
That's such a good question. I don't yet have an answer, but it's such a good question.
I think you just have to meet the individual experience where it is. Like there's a whole range of like self-acceptance and self-denial, and I think I was listening to what you were saying, and I was like, well, actually, I do want to be treated differently. I want to make sure that my needs are met and not ignored, and if that means that I get treated differently, which might equal the way that I deserve to be treated, then that's what I want. Like, but also, I think there's this, like one of the things that really bothers me is like that my dollar as a disabled person, if I'm going to give someone, and this is specifically related to transportation, like $1, that I can be left out on the side of the street because like that dollar isn't going to equal someone else's dollar who could physically get into a taxi cab or get on the metro. And that economic disparity around physical access is mind-boggling to me. That someone who is quote-unquote normal's single dollar is worth more than mine because of what I can physically accomplish or not. And don't think about it too long, because if you do, it'll drive you absolutely bonkers. But like, I think like that's a good place to start, like thinking about how those transactions are nowhere near equal based on the way you physically or mentally present to the economic world, if that makes any sense. Anyway, annoying.
As you were taught, and that makes a lot of sense, as you were posing the question, what came to mind for me, what started to take shape, was thinking about the failures of past workplaces in terms of accommodations. And just either the outright failure, so there's a denial, an absolute denial there, saying, pressuring disabled folks to, into a more normative, non-disabled experience that's just not feasible, it's not possible. And then I've also experienced being fortunate enough to receive those accommodations, and then having an employer, having an institution feeling like because I asked for that accommodation, then they get a right to pry. And yes, acknowledge that I have different needs, so I do need to be treated in this different way, but also recognize that that doesn't give to these other folks, that doesn't give anyone a right to pry and invade without your consent into your experiences. That's what came to mind.
I think if I got part of what your question was wrong, correct me, because I have a hearing thing. But I think one of the things that you were saying was narrative is part of like the disability story, right? And when you were asking like how much little to have of that. And I think, and you may already do this, obviously I'm not familiar with the work, but I think one of the things that I like to see when I'm reading or watching things about disabled characters is that that's not the only arc. That there's something in the narrative that has climax and a problem that they're going through, or conflict, like something else that is maybe not the main thing. The disability stuff can be the main thing, but something else so that you're reminded like, oh, they go through other stuff, right? It's not just this one thing. Not to make assumptions about what you have written, but I wasn't sure if that was one of the things you were asking.
And I will say, you mentioned that you were looking towards other blind writers. I don't know if you know the poet Kathy Wolf, who recently passed last year, but she was a DC and nationally recognized queer blind writer, and she died of cancer last year, but her blindness or low vision informs almost every poem that she writes.
I don't have a question, it's more of a comment about the cultural aspects that you ladies were discussing. And I want to say that in my family, we have Huntington's disease. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a neurodegenerative illness that affects the brain and the body. And very little has ever been said or written about it. So whenever we read something where it's mentioned or we see it on TV, we get so excited. We have to send out text messages, call everyone and say, oh, House, the show House is talking about it. It's on Call the Midwife. I discovered that it was in a book called Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne 50 years ago. And what we realized, they really depict it well because it's kind of like the worst of ALS and dementia put together. And when we see it on television or read about it, we become very critical, like, okay, that's right, that's not right, this doesn't happen. But in most cases, we see that it is well written into the script, which kind of lets us know that whoever's writing about this has either had an experience in the family or did very good research. So in that sense, we are excited that it is bringing awareness to this disability, to this disease that has haunted my family for over 40 years, that I know that my husband's family. So I just wanted to share that when you were talking about culture, pop culture, how sometimes they do a terrible job, but sometimes they do a good job.
Totally. I mean, anytime I see any actor who has dwarfism who's not Peter Dinklage, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So, yeah, I actually really get what you're saying there. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else had anything to comment on that, but...
I think that was just, thank you for sharing that comment, and that was really beautiful. And what comes to mind as you were saying that is, as you touched on the importance of the research there, and researching in a respectful way that doesn't further these individuals and communities, but approaches them with respect and makes it very clear that they have consent. They have the right to consent to indulging about this experience or to not indulge about this experience. So that's sort of some of what I was thinking about, and that can be it can be so joyful when you see.
Get so excited. We have to let everyone know. Did you know that?
Right.
That episode had Huntington's disease in it.
Right. And I would even say it can be like life-changing as well. You know, if you don't have the vocabulary for some of these things, if no one has taken the time to sit down and explain parts of something that afflicts you to you, like pre-diagnosis, that representation, that the accurate representation, can catalyze such a profound journey of doing your own research and self-discovery, and show you open up avenues that you weren't previously aware of because no one had taken the time to, yeah.
Well, in today's times, you can easily Google anything. But when I was first introduced to this from my husband's family, it was 45 years ago. I went to the library and looked it up in the encyclopedias there, and there were like 3 lines written about it. And that was it. The rest I had to learn through experience. So we're always happy when awareness is spread.
And I guess, yeah, that's kind of what we all have to do, I feel like, is, or unfortunately, I mean, it's great that we're in this time that disability is being more recognized generally, but also that a lot of times, like, the recognition really is on us as writers to put ourselves out there, to write about our experience, or to write it through a character, or share it through a poem, however we're going to do it, to kind of make ourselves known, make ourselves heard, show that we're here. So, if there's no more questions, then we can move on to our reception. So, yeah, our panelists will be here. We are going to have food and drinks set out in the back tables. And yeah, feel free to mingle. Yes, we also have a QR code, as Brandon is showing me. That's for the survey, correct? Yes, so there's also a survey for this event on that black and white QR code over on this side over here. So if you don't mind, before you leave, just scanning that, taking our quick survey, let us know what you thought about the event. That would be great. Yeah, and feel free to mingle, get to know each other. Thank you so much.